It's the Jamming Fanzine podcast. I mean, the thing about a fanzine was holding it in your hand, right? And looking at the way it's been put together and the punk way it's been put together, quite frankly. And it had a staple in it, you know, and that is a fanzine, right?
Episode 6, Morrissey, Frankie, Natalie and Bronski, with Russell Young and Chris Heath.
And welcome everybody, I'm your host Tony Fletcher. Thanks so much for listening in. If you've been listening previously, you'll know the drill right here. This podcast was initially set up as a cross-promotion for the book that is now available worldwide. It's called The Best of Jamming, Selections and Stories from the Fanzine that grew up 1977 to 86, a title that I hope is at least a little bit self-explanatory. However, the longer that we've been putting out this podcast, and the more that I'm thinking that in the new year, 2022, might continue it by having more conversations with other people who are involved or have been involved in similar ventures, the more I'm realizing that really the subtitle for this podcast should be Conversations Around the Fanzine Culture, or even conversations around the post-punk culture, the punk culture, the new wave culture, because certainly all the conversations we're having extend way beyond the jamming fanzine and much more into the sort of mood of the times. This episode is a perfect case in point. I got to sit down in person in New York City with two wonderful people. Russell Young, a photographer par excellence back in the 1980s. He went straight from jamming more or less to doing the cover for George Michael's Faith album, one of the big sellers of the 1980s, went on to become video director and these days a fine artist, and writer, author and great journalist Chris Heath. Both of them were integral to whatever successes that jamming had, and in the conversation that we had together, both Chris and Russell kind of imparted a lot of the knowledge they've acquired over the years that's kind of gotten them to the top of their game, and they are at the top of their game, both of them. And I learned a lot from that. So if I learned a lot from that, I'm trusting that you will as well. And even if you're not an aspiring writer or photographer or artist of any kind, just some of the anecdotes are really fascinating. Just, some insights into some of the personalities that Chris interviewed and Russell photographed. I will come back at the end of the interview to tell you about some events we have coming up to coincide with the worldwide publication of the book. It's been available in the UK since September, but as of December 2nd, 2021, it's out worldwide. Enjoy our conversations about Bronski, Frankie, Natalie, Morrissey, Astley, and more. Cheers.
Do you want to buy a copy of Jamming?
I'm Russell Young. I was a photographer for Jamming. My very first paid job was for Jamming of Virginia Astley, and I am now an artist.
I'm Chris Heath. I'm a writer. The first kind of real long feature stories I wrote anywhere were for Jamming, and that's the kind of thing I've sort of carried on doing ever since.
And the three of us are meeting in New York City, where all three of us have lived at some point in time. And I want to get to how we all ended up here, but I thought I would start by saying that A, it's a pleasure to see you both, and B, thank you both so much for being totally up for everything to do with this book, which was both fun to put together and brought back many a memory of late nights and deadlines and all that fun stuff. But to And you both contributed some nice little copy for the book as well. But just to throw it all the way back to how you both came to jamming, it wasn't strictly in the fanzine days, but you may have had an understanding of it as a fanzine. Russell, you got to us about 2 or 3 issues before Chris. So what's your memory of coming and finding out about jamming and coming to us?
I mean, it was just exciting. I walked in and there was a real buzz and energy, and I went, oh my God, these people are great. And I was looking for I'd been assistant to an amazing photographer, Christos Raftopoulos, and I'd honed my craft and was out there taking photographs, but I was looking for some paid jobs, and I knew this is what I wanted to do. And you gave me the opportunity. I mean, I ended up doing Morrissey for a cover for you. I ended up sort of doing the Smiths live. I mean, it was just it was just a great journey to go on with you. But the energy was incredible. I mean,
can you remember where we were when you first?
Yeah, it was some like basement or something like that, wasn't it? I mean, it was like I was like, okay, it's like where a minicab office would be.
We were an underground magazine in the literal sense as well as the metaphorical sense. We were underneath what was then Second Vision, I believe, Robin Richards' design company on the Hammersmith Road.
Yeah. I could probably walk to that office now. You know, I've got a good memory with all that.
I could walk to it now. I remember that it was number 69, and I dug out an office in the basement, a windowless office when we decided to get the magazine further going. Were you aware of it as a fanzine or a magazine? Can you remember what it was?
No, I'd seen it as a fanzine. I mean, I'd collected everything. I mean, I was a junkie for fanzines. Yeah, I mean, I had everything, sniffing glue, everything. I would just get, piles of these things.
Did you call up a bunch of magazines, or did you kind of think, let me start from the ones I want to work for?
No, I called a few. Yeah. I probably called Sounds, Enemy, Melody Maker. They probably all said no at that stage, not even getting in the door. So you were very open, let me in the door and let me start my career, which led me to amazing places, lots of different avenues.
Was it myself, Alan, John Wilde, a combination of the three?
Yeah. I'm not sure I remember John that day.
So it was probably myself and Alan.
Yeah.
Now, what was your experience then, Chris?
I was hoping you could help me because it's all blurry. But
because it was a long time ago.
Well, no, it's not that. It's just I can't. Knowing myself then, I can't believe I had the nerve to get in touch with you or quite what I said. I don't know if I wrote or if I phoned up, but I don't know why I somehow thought maybe this magazine would let me write something. I really could. It sounds idiotic saying it like that. And you did, and I think you said, I can't remember whether I wrote something first, and then I remember coming down to Nomis, and then I remember exactly walking in, and it was you, John, and Alan, and talking to you all, and I was incredibly intimidated by you all, but you also weren't as scary as I thought people were going to be. You know what I mean? I thought there was a sort of spirit where I thought that maybe I could be part of this, and maybe this could work.
You wrote in the book something about just seeing maybe an opening. You said something about how we weren't judgmental, but obviously we judged music, because you kind of had to, but we weren't sort of judgmental people. And I would like to think that there was this openness that people would call us up and we would try and get a sense of if they were semi-serious, semi-talented, but pretty much invite them in and say, well, come in and talk with us, show us what you got.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that was my experience, and I didn't need to be encouraged twice. I don't know if I could have been explicit to myself, but in all my actions, I realised this was an amazing opportunity for me to do. Suddenly, I was being allowed to do the thing that I hadn't even worked out what it was, but suddenly I was being allowed to do the thing that I wanted to do.
Right, and that's a really important aspect of this because we don't all set off, I can't imagine that you, Russell, set off saying you were going to be a fine artist if you were coming up through photography necessarily, and I didn't necessarily set off saying I'm going to write books, and maybe you didn't either, Chris. It's kind of, I want to be in this world and I know there's a place for me. You were coming from photography.
Yeah, I'd been to did a BA honours degree in graphic design, film photography, and then that led, the photography part I'd been doing since I was 8 years old. I'd been drawing since I was 3. I'd always been making marks and things like that. So it was what I wanted to do, desperately wanted to do. And having assisted Christos, I knew he did fashion. I thought I was going to do fashion, but after working in the fashion world, it was like, I can't deal with these people. I actually can't deal with these on a daily basis. And the music industry, your magazine, it was just all so like a family and friendly. And I didn't ever feel any pressure that if I fucked up with a negative or anything like that, messed, I could just call up somebody and go shoot it again, right? I don't think I ever messed up, but it was like, they didn't feel like that pressure. It's,
I think it was
a very, very relaxed and easy environment to work in.
Which is great to hear, and we had to refresh our memories when we did a little call for the book, because your first piece, yes, Virginia Astley,
yeah,
but simultaneously, because for the same issue, and actually I think Chris has brought in a whole bunch of them. I brought in a couple. You came with me up to Ipswich to see UB40.
UB40, yeah, which, when you told me, I said, I don't think I've ever been to Ipswich in my life. And you said, yes, you drove me up there. And I'm like, really? And then I looked at the photographs and went, oh yeah, I remember taking those.
You probably got the work because you had a car.
Absolutely, yes. There's.
Where's Virginia Astley? I used to love Virginia
Oh.
Astley.
Interestingly, somebody just reviewed the book and said, hey, you can dip back in and rediscover people like Virginia Astley. And that was one they mentioned.
Yeah.
And you wrote that album is one you still listen to this day.
From Gardens Where We Feel Secure.
Yeah, what a beautiful album.
Yeah, I mean, I still listen to that, and we live down by the beach and just listen to that, and it's the countryside. I go to sleep listening to that. When my 20-year-old was in the womb, I'd play that to him all the time. It just takes me somewhere else.
It's interesting that we had you then go off and take photographs of the Smiths live. Morrissey was on the cover of issue 17 with a press shot by Paul Cox, who was also very, very easy to work with. I'm pretty sure, it was Paul Cox. And you took some live photos there. And you write in the book about just the excitement of seeing the Smiths, because it was a really important band. And they actually, we kind of, latched onto them to some degree.
And that was in 1983 as well, right?
Yes, right.
I mean, so that's early Smiths.
Well, you went to see them. I think you said it was the Electric Ballroom. It was in late 82.
Okay.
And you said the crowd was unbelievably friendly because you were used to getting thrown around with a camera.
Yeah, I mean, with a camera, right? So I walked into the crowd and it parted like the Red Sea. I mean, it really, because they could see, like, here's somebody coming to photograph the idol, the god. And, I mean, he performed occasionally to me. He had the gladioli out of his back pocket and was delightful and eccentric, and I was just like, fell in love. I mean, it was just like, Right. And I've seen him over the years. We've sort of vaguely kept in touch. I think I saw him in Ventura at the Majestic, which was a very small thing about 5 or 6 years ago on a tour. Smallest place he was playing, and he looked out the crowd halfway through a song. He went, what the fuck are you doing here? To point it at me. And I'm like, what the fuck are you doing here? Back, So, we've kept a relationship, and I did the Everyday Like Sunday sleeve, and that was all because of the early days of jamming and then doing that session in Liverpool with him.
Doing that session in Liverpool, which we'll get to. I'd love to get to that in a minute, because actually part of it is that I noted going through that although we started off and you were doing live pictures, you gravitated very quickly to doing more like portrait stuff where you're outdoors and then eventually indoors. So I think it's a classic case of finding your strength. There were other people that were very good and very happy to go to gigs, and you were able to work with artists in the open air or in the studio and deliver some top-notch shots. And right around the time that you were just getting familiar with us, Chris came a knocking, and we were scratching our heads a bit. You wrote to me at one point and said, I think I had another early piece with you. So you must have pitched us on a couple of things. So you remember your first pieces?
So I think the first one Andy White, and the first two were Andy White and the Inca Babies. Andy White was someone I knew at university. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I probably, I probably didn't tell
Did
you.
he ask that you be the journalist? Is that how you got your start?
No. He was someone at university who I correctly thought, no, this person is going to become something. And, though he didn't become the biggest star in the world, he's had a career through to this day. So I think I just knew that that seemed to make sense. And then the Inca Babies I also knew through, I sort of knew Dave Haslam, the writer and DJ.
I didn't know he had a connection to them.
Well, I'm going to embarrass myself here. So I was in a band at college, at university, and the two people I was in a band with, their best friend was Dave Haslam. So we went up and stayed with him in Manchester. And I guess the Inca Babies were his friends and lived in the same estate or the next estate. So I was sort of aware of them very early, and they seemed kind of interesting.
And it's interesting looking at these early pieces, because the same way as I was saying with Russell, you see somebody kind of gradually forming themselves. For starters, the reason you never had to worry about messing up. I mean, your first piece with Andy White had one of the... when I found it, I thought we were always pretty good at doing black type on the blue background, but I think we excelled ourselves with your Andy White piece. I don't even know if you have it there, but it's actually almost unreadable. I mean, you got paid for something I don't think anybody could have read.
It's possibly I wrote it like that.
And then I was watching as you sort of progressed to a couple of slightly bigger pieces like the Go-Betweens, and they are quite quote heavy. Sort of start off with the quotations, and they're almost like potted biographies. And that's sort of how. Do you have a progression of other artists that you remember working your way up?
It was funny, because I guess the first really big story I did was the Bronski beat one. I'm quite pleased that I wrote it, but I was also monumentally embarrassed by it because it's written with such appalling overconfidence. And it's like I'm trying so because it, at that age you only do anything by it all being it's all a con job and a put on. You're trying to pretend to be something. And it's so obvious to me that I'm desperately trying to be.
So how old were you when you were that article? I mean, roughly.
I guess, what's that? It's like 22 maybe?
Yeah, that's probably when I started about that age. And
and I mean, I admire the fact that I just went and did it. but I'm also kind of acting like I know things there that I certainly don't know now.
Right.
On the other hand, I think it's what 22-year-olds should be doing.
For me, reading it back, I think it's a piece of brilliant journalism because the overconfidence allows you to do something that we weren't fond of at Jammy. You take about 2 pages before you get a quote out of Bronski, which was generally something reserved for like Paul Morley at the NME, of whom perhaps more later. But what you did there was you actually wrote a whole kind of essay on gayness in pop music. Because Bronski Beat were actually quite important because they were the first band that said all of us, all 3 of us, are openly gay, and we're going to sing about male love, and what are you going, basically what you're going to do about it. Whereas you take in that article, you talk about, well, I actually prefer the music of Boy George and Morrissey, neither of whom had actually come out. So you actually sort of like just assume. Make your own presumptions, but everything
outed everybody in the music business.
I'm getting more embarrassed.
But it's actually very pertinent and very accurate when you actually have quite a lot of vision. So the same way that I am often when I look back at the fanzine stuff, I am excruciatingly embarrassed by my own writing, and then I bump into people who say, "No, the energy of your writing inspired me to do this, that, and the other. You have nothing to apologise for." I feel the same way about that Bronski Beat piece. I think it was quite brave.
I guess it was honest to who I was pretending to be, which is a weird construct. But there is an honesty to that.
There's one point at which actually the band does say to you, I think literally, they said, we're not that deep. They're actually saying to you, you can't intellectualize this to us. We're actually not that deep. We are indeed sort of small town boys.
Well, I just sort of imagine they had this incredibly annoying 22-year-old coming on so strong. They're just like, stop it.
Yeah.
By that time, the magazine has progressed quite a bit, Russell, because that's actually in the same issue as your beautiful Morrissey cover.
Wow, my Morrissey cover, yeah.
And I mean, we've got these magazines here as well, which I brought in a couple, but Chris brought the rest up. This is, I would say, was probably the most iconic of the various covers we ever commissioned.
Right.
Morrissey is just looking out at us with the biggest quiff.
Yeah, I mean, he had this beautiful striped shirt on. He is, he's got his hair, he's got his look going. And was it John who wrote this thing? So we sat in some hotel and he talked and talked and talked. And I went, hang on, this is the only genius I've ever met in the music business. And I still believe that to today. He was the only 15 years in the music business. He was the only true genius I ever came across. I loved his off-kilter answers, his off-kilter way. We grew up about the same age, 15 miles apart from each other. So all his experiences were my experiences. And he was just verbalizing them in just the most fantastic, it's a very sarcastic way, a very humorous way, a very tongue-in-cheek way. So I just fell in love with him and his music and the lyrics and the Smiths and him. And this is in front of Liverpool Town Hall. And it was a windy day and we went up on the steps. We did maybe one roll and I had my silver photographer's case, brand new silver. I'm now a photographer that is going to do a cover and I've got a silver case to put my cameras in. and the wind caught it and blew everything. Film, I mean, over like a 20-foot range. And so Morrissey and I are crawling on the ground, picking up the film and cameras and, you know, whatever. And we were laughing and just getting on. And I just continued to take pictures that day of him. I mean, he was delightful. He was very shy. A later session that actually I think became the everyday, like, Sunday sleeve. He walks into the studio with a carrier bag and like he's crunched up and very embarrassed and shy. And I go, Morrissey, it's me. And he's like, looks around, there's nobody else. He went, oh, okay. And he sort of relaxed, right? Because he comes into rooms, the shyest person there is. And he had that shyness then, but a genius, just genius. And his words, his lyrics, his love of music. And
that's late 84, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's late 84. So you would have first seen him in 83. So just to correct what I said earlier. And so it's around, I believe it's probably around Hatful of Hollow. And so the band is just buzzing, you know, and they're big with our readers. And I think you captured the essence of Morrissey.
I mean, he's Oscar Wilde, he's a poet, he's everything there.
He's handsome as well.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, genuinely.
So I got,
at that point in his life.
Over the years, I got paid lots of money because I made men look handsome. And still gave them a roughness, an edge, and whatever. I just could do that and know how to light them. And this is outside, but I'm, you know, working with lights, and I probably got a reflector stapled to my chest or something to get that light bouncing back and whatever. And it's also the instructions you give. I mean, years later, I would take a session of him, and I think he was, you know, a bit miserable that day. And I said, you know, imagine you've got sherbet in your mouth. And he smiled, and it's like the only pictures of him ever smiling, but this is beautiful smile. So as a photographer, you're always trying to drag these things out of people. And
there are great differences between photographers and writers, but I think that both have the need to put their subjects at some form of ease if they're going to be able to turn in, as journalist photographers, good work. Did you feel that was something that was necessary when you went into a room or on the road or however it was you sat down with people?
I don't think I thought about things like that until much later. I think instinctively I always think as a writer you've got a balance to make, and it's a very delicate balance. Because you want to put people at ease, but you don't want them to be too much at their ease. You don't get good interviews with people if they're too much at their ease, because if they're too much at their ease, they think, oh, we're all in this together and we're on the same side. I don't have to explain myself. You need people to want to explain themselves. So you want them to be comfortable, but not completely at ease. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I find very often the word that is used sometimes about the earlier issues and some of the Q&A sort of interviews is people seem to sort of unguarded.
Yeah, see, I think the key thing is not putting people at their ease. The key thing you can do, and you do naturally when you're young, is be super interested. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that makes people talk, is they see in you that you really are interested in what you're asking of them, and that stops people being on automatic mode, and that starts them talking, and that people respond to that. All humans respond to that, and you see journalists really, really quickly often just getting into a routine and a rhythm, and they're just and as soon as they're doing it like a job, and then they kind of want answers, but they're not that super interested. They lose that attraction to people. You know, they stop getting such good answers, and I've fought ever since I thought about it more, and especially as you get older, I've fought to always go in the room with that same kind of interest.
So does that mean that you are willing to follow people on tangents? You might go in with a set of notes and questions, but if they go on a tangent and it's interesting, you're like, hey, I'm interested.
Yeah, I think it's like a sort of elastic string. You have to judge, depending on the circumstances, how long you'll let it stretch out, because sometimes that's a really good way of building up a rapport with someone. But sometimes it's incredibly wasteful and leads to a complete lack of focus. So it's a balance, but yeah, certainly ideally, yeah.
Right. On those, I've got a note from talking with you previously, Russ, on some of the people you photographed. I mean, there's a lot of names in there. Do any of them jump out at you as particularly enjoyable people? They don't have to have been the most successful artists. But
George Best. My dad took me to see George Best. Oh, I just fainted when I saw him play. It was just insane. He'd be right down at the front and he'd just be like a bullfighter. And I couldn't believe I was meeting him and taking his photographs. And this one here, I've gone on the ground. And he's like, we were in the middle of London. He's like, get up, get up, get up, get up, get up. You know, he's embarrassed that I'm lying on the ground. And he's like, why are you doing that? I said, I'm just making you look like, you know, larger than life. And I think he started drinking after these, but again. But I love that photograph of George Best. I mean,
It's very nice. Who put the dotted line over it?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe that's the other Russell who put a dotted.
It is actually a lovely portrait. If we could actually just remove that dotted line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, after a while, I stopped seeing the dotted lines and the yellows and everything else and whatever, and you know, just.
So in the same issue, then.
But he's doing less here. Less is.
Yeah, I mean, I think gradually we couldn't afford the colour, so that kind of eliminated.
How brilliant!
Yes.
Except that's a nice colour photograph, yeah.
It's a very nice colour photograph, and I think you got something out of everything but the girl. They were hard to, I mean, they weren't taking brilliant photographs at the time.
None. I mean, as a photographer, you could do some research and you look and you go, oh, wow, this is going to be a hard day. But no, they came to my studio. I had a studio which Christos had let me use all the time. It was his studio, but it was my studio as well. So I had time, and, you know, I mean, that's...
That might be the very first time you did a studio session for us. As best I can tell, it probably is.
Yeah.
So maybe as a magazine, we were moving up enough that we could say, "Would you be able to come to our studio, Russell's studio, and do a shot?" Because you're moving from people who say, "Shoot me in the streets," you know, to
I mean, and now you're calling it a magazine, not a fanzine, right? You just called it a magazine then.
Yeah, I think at this point it is.
Yeah. So it's.
I think it is. One other one I want to mention of yours, Russell, would be 10,000 Maniacs.
Yes. I remember John, the day before the photo session, saying, come and see 10,000 Maniacs live. And I was going to Brixton somewhere. And we're standing quite close to the front. And then Natalie is singing a song and she starts crying in the middle of the song. I mean, it was just so emotional, just like an amazing moment. I spent most of the next day with her. I met them at the hotel room, and she was staying with the whole band in a tiny little hotel room in Bayswater, and they're all like being lads, and I'm like, what the hell? You know, I said, come sleep on my couch, you know, whatever. I think we went for an Indian meal that night. I mean, we got on really well, actually, and I took some gorgeous photographs of her. Just, you know, yeah, she was a great subject.
Right.
I remember being surprised. She had trousers on and her leg lifted up, and she's got hairy legs, and I was like, oh wow, how freaking cool is that you're that relaxed about all that you're, you know, in the sense a pop star, but you know.
Yeah, and the American kind of alternative scene, as it ended up getting called, was really just gathering steam. I mean, you also took some nice pictures of REM.
Yeah.
So it was, you know, it was REM, 10,000 Maniacs, and there was some harder edge bands, you know, the Husker-Dus, and there were also the more Americana Long Riders style bands. So, you know, there were good pictures of those, and you know, you were the slight thing. You're like a couple of, you know, about 3 issues or so ahead of Chris, who's gradually doing more and more for us. And there are a couple of general things I want to raise, and before getting into a couple more specifics towards the end of the magazine. So you were right. I called it a magazine.
Yeah.
And it really struck me that the two of you were instrumental in taking what was, at the point you joined, Russell, you know, a fanzine that had actually only come out once a year because of me running this record label, but it was really established, had gone colour, but we made the leap into being a bi-monthly magazine every 2 issues with still a massive fanzine element to it. And then you came on board just right after that, Chris. And I think you were both instrumental in taking it from being this scrappy fanzine that had dared to go and fight its way into the shops and turn it into more of a magazine. But I don't think you ever did anything that just sold us out to the mainstream. I think you were part of the journey.
We didn't ruin the fanzine. I thought we were going to be blamed. The It used to be a great fanzine till you two came along.
Where was that going with it?
I think that you were both part of the journey of giving people a reason to, you know, pick up this magazine, whether it was every 2 months or as of, you know, September, what would it be, 84 every month, because, you know, good journalism, good photography, and still doing it the right way. I mean, I'm very aware that you were not, I don't think either of you came to me or to John or Alan from a fanzine background. You came to us from I want to write articles for you, but they're not Q&A. You know, from the beginning they weren't Q&A, right?
No, but at the same time, I think in parallel, it's true for Russell too. We weren't doing, whether instinctively or whether we weren't doing like some version of what was somewhere else.
No,
you know, I wasn't writing pieces that were an audition to get into the NME. I maybe intuitively at that point I got this was an amazing form and this was an amazing magazine that you could write about this kind of music and these kind of people in this kind of way, and you could do it in a distinctive way here. And it wasn't the fanzine way, but it was a way that had evolved out of that was really valid and special and distinct. That's what it felt to me.
And I felt the experimentation and growing up as a photographer, right? It allowed me to try different things and, you know, hone my craft. And it be published, right? Because you can be a great photographer, but I've never had an exhibition of my photographs ever. So, you know, you want people to see it, right? The magazine was a way to, you know, to get your work out there and to go, okay, so that worked in the magazine, that didn't, right? You know, it's, you know, I mean, you honed your craft as well, right? Of writing and going, you know, oh, wow, that was a great article, I enjoyed that, you know.
Oh, no, I mean, my learning curve through this pile of issues is huge.
Yeah.
Well, and it was allowing me to do it.
The camaraderie was pretty important. Something else that struck me as we're talking there, but I think I was always aware of it at the time. Some people, and there's nothing wrong with this at all, will come to jamming and use it as a stepping stone. There were one or two people who came, got a couple of pieces with us, a couple of pieces in something, you know, another magazine, and then got a job on a weekly. And that's absolutely fine, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. Both of you seem to say, well, jamming is a good fit for me.
Yeah.
And I don't think we had to share you much with other people.
Well, except that just to be accurate with the record, but, you know, I took a job at Smash Hits by early 1985. So at that point, you know, and that was the beginning of a whole other career. But then I just carried on doing jamming as much, and it didn't change what I did for jamming. And, you know, those two things that from then on carried on in parallel. But I suspect the issue where I had 6 pieces in, I suspect that's when I was already at Smash Hits.
Well, it would have been if that's... So maybe, because it's interesting, because my memory's not going to be intact either. So maybe the fact that if you had a day job at Smash Hits and you could write your, what would you want to call it, more expansive pieces for us? I don't know, maybe we gave you more words at times, then that was all you needed?
Yeah, look, I was just having a great time. That's been most of the whole story. You know, I was just... You know, but both of those things were things that I was incredibly enjoying and finding incredibly fulfilling. And I was just saying yes to all of anything that, you know, it was all exciting, and I wanted to do it. I don't remember. I'm now thinking, how did I write 6 pieces in 2 months away from my day job? I have no idea, but I don't remember it ever being
that would take 2 years now to do that.
Yeah, but you know, I was just having fun. And
I guess maybe what I'm getting at there, Chris, is you didn't spread yourself too thin. So I mean, if you had Smash Hits and you had jamming, that was probably enough for you.
Yeah, no, because I wasn't. I don't know what I would have done that would have taken the place of jamming. You know, I suppose, even though it wasn't really a good fit for me yet, but, you know, later on I wrote for The Face, and I guess if I'd started to write for The Face, maybe that's the place you could have done some version of it. But I would have rather be writing for jamming at that point, because I wanted to be in pop music like that. You know, there were lots of internal problems ultimately, but the people in the office at jamming, you know, even when you went around, you know, John and Paul Mather and people were at heart incredible enthusiasts, and it was very, and they had a real kind of excitement that was a big part of the whole thing. That I was part of. And I think memories of other stuff can cloud that. So, you know, talking about it now, I am thinking about how this happened, and it was like, you know, it'd be most often probably John phoning me up and saying, "You're going to go and interview so-and-so," and it was just excitement.
Yeah.
You know, we were exciting about doing all these things. Some of them were the really obvious things to do. Some of them were crazy ideas, but there was just an excitement.
I've always envied photographers because I don't think that they have to pass a judgment on their subject's art. You can just be like, I just want to make you look good. And you can literally go home and say, well, I hate the music, love the person, or I love the music, don't like the person, but my job is to make them look good. As writers, they're more likely to say, what do you think of the new record? And we are more likely to find ourselves sort of, wanting to write about either people we like or have a need to share our opinion with the people we're interviewing. Was that something that was ever a burden for you?
I don't know about a burden. It's an issue. And I think there's different ways of negotiating it in different situations. It depends what you're writing and why you're writing it. Because I can't bear... When people handle it in what I think is the wrong way, I can't bear the syndrome where, you'll see articles about people, and there's a kind of writer who every time they interview someone, they'll talk about how they've just made their best album, or their best album since their great album, and it's like. And I just read those articles with a filter. I understand why they feel, and I imagine they probably pass the lie detector test when they're writing it, because that's what they're sort of, that's their way of dealing with what you're talking about, and also sort of dealing with selling their own importance of what they're doing. But that to me would be horrible if I found myself doing that. At the same time, you're going to get in some awkward places if but. I guess my real answer in real terms is usually in the real world there's a lot else to talk about, and there's a lot else that's interesting about people.
Do you have people, record companies, bands, people come after you, come send you horrible messages and things like that, or be disappointed?
Don't forget, we're in a very different world now to when we
communicate.
Yeah. Well, no, but we're in a different world in that I used to. I mean, jamming was, and would present itself as this sort of beacon of positivity compared to most of the way the music press worked in Britain.
Right.
I mean, don't forget, it was absolutely totally normal for some big American act to come over, for the record company to spend loads of money to take loads of people from Sounds and Melody Maker and the NME out to Europe to do something with them, knowing full well that they were going to annihilate them, make total fun of them, and they were going to pay their airfares, pay their hotel, pay everything.
Yeah.
They're going to write these stinky stories, and everyone's happy that this is just how the world works.
Right.
Well, that world doesn't exist anymore.
No.
Obviously.
Yeah.
And in the modern world, I definitely feel, it's a trickier thing. I sometimes write about celebrities, and it's a trickier thing because I'm not prepared to do some sort of dishonest song and dance in order to write about celebrities.
Sure.
But I write about. If I'm writing about someone, I'm interested in them, and I will write about, and I will show that interest, and also, I think, always make them interesting. That's what I'm going to give them. But if they're going to get frustrated that there's not that sort of extra fake compliment when it's not the one that I want to make, then I'm not. Well, they're not going to get that from me, and but I hope what else they get compensates for that. But it may not always.
Yeah, I do want to raise what I think was your most. You wrote a bunch of wonderful things for us, Chris, and there's a point I want to make about the two of you attached to that in a moment. But the piece there were three pieces of yours we've reproduced in full in the book. One is Bronski Beat, Lloyd Cole, which later the cover that you did, Russell, which I think really began to, even more than the Morrissey one, just showed where you were headed. But the Frankie one. That Frankie one is a fascinating piece, not least because of what happened, in the middle of it. Can you just talk us through that moment? Because I also think what you wrote on reflection now, all these years later, accompanying it in the book, is very interesting. It's an insight into how you worked.
Yeah, and I think of that piece. Over the years, some of those, like, I hadn't really thought about the Bronski Beat piece until rereading it, and I told you how I felt about it. But the Frankie piece I've thought about often, and I often think of that as the first piece where I discovered or was able to do the thing that I do, and I think it's the first sort of proper bit of writing that I did. And I went down. They were rehearsing their first tour down in the Brixton Academy. And basically I just went down, watched them rehearse, spoke to Holly in the dressing room for a while, then joined all the rest of them in the pub. And in the pub, then everything kicked off. And it kicked off in two ways. First, I was there with the lads, as they were called, the other three members. And
Scallywags.
And Paul was there too. And they sort of tortured me in a way that was, they kept grabbing my notebook and saying rude. And the phrase I always remember is being asked, "Do you tongue your own hoof?" Not a phrase I was aware of, but I could work out what I was being asked. But it was funny because it was I felt like I was, they were the biggest group in Britain at the time,
in the world.
And I knew that something very weirdly real was happening around me. So this carried on like this. In the end, after a while, they just kept insulting me. So I was just writing and stopped saying things. And then one of them, maybe Nasha, says, "He's that arty. He doesn't ask any questions. He's a real Morley," or something like that. And anyway, so meanwhile, I'd had a really good interview with Holly. I thought, and seeing them rehearse was it's one of those things you sort of both took for granted and knew was an amazing privilege, because you were seeing, as I said, the biggest band in Britain. No one had ever seen them perform and do a proper show, and I'm just watching them rehearse it, and it was fascinating. And then I don't know if we were getting ready to leave or we left, but anyway, we're in a rough Brixton pub, and the world was, it wasn't like now where celebrity trumps everything. To be Frankie Goes to Hollywood, you may have had 3 number 1 singles, but you're sort of you're outsider in mainland Britain, and a load of people in a pub in Brixton are looking at you like, what are you doing here? And then it really kicked off. Yeah. And I don't know who said what to whom, but we ran outside, and the last thing I saw was one of the security guys getting. It's the only time I've ever seen anyone hit someone over the head with a chair for real. It was fascinating, but I remember thinking, the truth is I wasn't the least bit scared. I probably should have been. I was just thinking, this is interesting. I got just like this. You can write. Things like this happen, you can write it, and it's going to be. I felt like I was like it. I felt like I was in. It's a thing that happens just a few times, where you feel like you're in one of the main places where things are happening in what you're interested in right at that moment, and all you have to do. I mean, it's not all. On one level, all you have to do is listen, write it down. Now, how you listen and how you write it down, there can be a huge gap between, but basically it's like that's the amazing opportunity you get if you can be in those situations. And it made for some harrowing reading, because you talk about the minder actually got pulled out with blood pouring down the back of his head. An ambulance was when you got back to the venue, an ambulance was called. I'd forgotten all of that because
and I think we always read it and sort of thought, well, the lads, as they were called, the 3 heterosexuals in Frankie, who seemed very intent on sort of making up for the other 2 and somehow overcompensating, had in many ways got what they were probably asking for. Yeah. And I've been in the wrong pub at the top of my road, so I know that if you are the biggest pop stars in Britain and you're from Liverpool and you've got the accents, everybody knows you're from Liverpool, and you're in a pub in South London giving it lots of large, there is every chance, and you've come into a tough pub, there's every chance that somebody's going to say, this is our opportunity to teach them a lesson, because that stuff does go on. It really does go on. And what was fascinating is, the band was actually then split between, one of them saying, well, this is why we need more minders, and the rest are going, if we didn't have minders, that wouldn't have happened. It was a whole entourage thing that caused this. It was a fascinating insight into a pretty rare moment.
But chaos reigned around them. I knew Paul before Frankie. He worked for when I designed clothes, he worked for my friend down in Kensington Market. And then I got to know Holly, and I remember them playing me Relax on the early demo stage. And what's your band called? And they went, Frankie Goes to Hollywood. And I went, you get nowhere with a name like that. That's terrible. And so they would ask me...
That's why you're a photographer.
Yeah, I'm not a journalist. But they would ask me over the years to go photograph them. They much prefer me for Sounds or any magazine. So I followed them around Europe, and chaos everywhere I went with them. It was absolutely always chaotic.
Yeah. It was a really, really fascinating piece. I remember when it came in, I think it was probably John saying to me, we got something really unusual here. Because, you kind of captured that when that celebrity, in nature, but they're working class lads, and when it sort of bumps into the old fashioned working class values of what are you doing in my pub, which is really what some of that must have boiled down to. But I appreciate that and you just put it into words again. This idea of being in the right place and just writing it down. Did you make notes? Was a notebook a common thing for you? Because
yeah, and I always was good at that, and to this day I'm.
Do you use a recorder?
Nowadays, I'd be more likely to use a recorder too, but no, back then I would have felt like you would have got sort of stomped on if you've got a recorder out. Maybe I had the recorder out when I was interviewing them, but just in the sort of general stuff, like when we went back to the venue, I'm sure I was just writing it all down constantly. But I always, that's always been my way, is to very, very openly take notes, because my theory is always that people get used to you very, very quickly if you're very open about taking notes, like they get used to a camera.
Yeah.
But if you try and hide a camera and sneak it, then they're going to be really really uptight about it. But if you're there, and I don't like that. I like the idea. I love getting on with people, and if you become friends with people, that's terrific. But I always think you should be very clear about why you're there, sort of visually very clear, and I think it's just healthier all round. So yeah, I was always very keen on taking notes. I think about that, and I think about some other things that happened early on. You don't appreciate how lucky you are. I mean, on one hand, you're putting yourself there, and that's how the luck happens. But because around the same time, I did my first Smash Hits cover, and it was with Wham, and I was on tour with them, and George Michael put his back out. Do you mind having a Smash Hits story about Wham in your podcast? And so I travelled back with him to London, and I just thought this was totally normal. And we stopped off at his parents' house for tea. And so we have tea with, and so I found out Smash Hits, and I said, I'm really sorry, I didn't see the second gig. And they're like, what did you do? And I said, we went back and went to his parents' house for tea. And you can see that. And Mark Ellen was going, it's probably going to be okay. I just thought things like that happened. And in a way they do, but...
Yeah, and once you're on the inside, and actually maybe if you're not starstruck about them, that's what provides you the access.
Yeah, I think there's something to that.
There is. If you're at comfort, I mean, I think that the musicians want you to be comfortable in their world. If you're a little too starstruck, they'll probably keep you a little at arm's length, or if they feel they can't trust you. Those two covers in succession, they're great. I particularly love the Cocteau Twins one, which is here.
That's great.
I really do. And of the various covers, there's you've got both of these.
So here is what I learned was I got so many magazine covers over the course of the next 10 years or so, because I would leave space for type. And I realized, I talked to Lawrence about this one, and we talked about where the logo would go, how I would frame the band, and so I would leave always space above. And like the Lemon Drops, I think made the cover of Sounds, should never have, but just because there was space, they got to, the designers love my work. And even when I would shoot record sleeves, I would leave space, and I would always try to introduce 2 or 3 good designers to the record company that I knew would not over graphic design things, let the beauty of a photograph, let the beauty of the person,
And this colour shot of Liz Fraser is one of my favourites, because I just think I love the way she's not quite looking at you. Which is I always think is quite crucial, to not always look at the camera. And they're both gorgeous. And I don't need to dwell on the end of jamming, but I would like to talk about where we went, because for you, it's funny. I would have if you'd asked me previously. At some point, how long between Cocteau Twins and George Michael's Faith cover, I might have presumed that it was a journey, but actually it was the following year. It was very quick.
Was, yeah. So I had these in my portfolio, and I went to Sounds and Blitz, and I took one live thing. My first thing for Sounds was live, and I went back to Tony, oh my God, I forget his name. Tony's not Stewart, no. Whoever the editor was, and I said, I'm never going to do live again. Just give me some covers and studio and feature stuff. And he did. He gave me a cover the next week of some, I can't remember who the hell it was now, but some incredible band. And I'm like, great, that worked. And then I did a few covers for Blitz, one of which was Rupert Everett, and his publicist was Connie Filippello, who came in, and I had this Polaroid thing, and I shot the cover within 5 minutes of him being in front of the cover, in front of my camera. We put it on the light box. I said, this is the cover. Look, we can put the type there, do that. The designer was there, and she went, what? And 2 weeks later, she called my portfolio in for George Michael. So.
And it would have had these in there as well, no doubt.
Yeah, I would have these, yeah.
Stylistically, you can see where that cover comes from.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, you went off to other music press for a while. I went off to other music press for a while. You had the job at Smash Hits.
I was there 2 or 3 years, and then I pretty soon I started working in America. So I was mainly working in Britain for the Face, but then by about 1990 I was working just before I was working for Details magazine, which is very different to what it became. It was in the early 90s. It was an incredibly exciting magazine to work for.
This really struck me. I heard something not too long ago, or read something, just seemed blindingly obvious, and I hadn't come across it in the previous 45, 50 years of being involved in some form of work, which was somebody said, if you are, there are three things like an editor's looking for. Ideally, you're all three. If you deliver it on time, if what you deliver is good, and if you're pleasant to work with.
Right.
And you can actually get away with any two of the three. So if your work is on time and it's good, they will probably deal with you being a little bit of maybe if you've got an ego or something, or they'll deal with that because the work is worth it and it's on time. And if you're pleasant to deal with and the work's on time, it doesn't always have to be the best because at least you're reliable.
Right.
But the ideal is to have all three. And it kind of has struck me that jamming where things were pretty haphazard, the two of you fulfilled all three of those pretty much all the time. Like things showed up on time, and they were good, and you were both always very, very easy to work with. I don't remember arguments. I don't remember arguments with the two of you.
Remember arguments either.
What I'm learning from that is we could have got away with being arseholes.
Oh fuck!
We still would have got the work.
I know.
Yeah.
But then you might have joined the other people who were 2 out of 3. That when that when push came to shove.
At least we know the secret to success now. So
we
continue.
So had you heard that before? Because I was
I haven't.
Blindingly obvious, really, when you think about it.
No, from outside we were never privy to that information.
I was dreading you were going to say, and it comes in at the right length, and I was thinking,
but I think that might have. No, see, I only heard this about a year ago. Is what I'm saying. It clicked with me. Like that's a perfect formula for.
Of course it is.
Work.
Yeah.
It really makes sense. But it also made me think. Well, I don't remember having runs, and other people they might, and there was never much money there at all. And it wasn't like you were like, well, I'm giving you really good. I'm doing most of the work here. Can you give me a bit more? There was never any of that. It was still playing football together, and you just made up for it by getting 6 pieces instead of the one that other people would get. So
I mean, it was the only money coming in at one point for me. The only money.
Yeah. Is it?
But I remember, I'd moved to London and I'd got it worked out. I needed to earn £30 a week. I was squatting, and in real terms, obviously it wasn't a lot of money. But if you were trying to get £30 a week, then I was laughing when this started happening.
Yeah,
he paid you more than £1 a week, did he? No.
I think we were paying like £30 1,000 words. So at first you'd
that's why you wrote long articles
£30 a month from us.
But nonetheless, anyway,
I think we tried to, we tried to do the right thing by paying people, even though actually there really wasn't the money to do it.
Right.
But that's all what that is. I mean, you're sort of 35 years to sum up in 2 minutes is going to be really hard. But you ended up doing a couple of books and carrying on as a writer. Do you want to just bring us up to speed in your own words?
Yeah, I've sort of had a few different careers, but they're all writing. In America, I've mainly worked doing non-fiction in magazines. Some pop culture and celebrity things, but an awful lot not. And then, in Britain, people in Britain know my books much better, because I've done numbers of books on both the Pet Shop Boys and Robbie Williams that have done well, and because they're not that, especially Robbie's not very well known over here, so it's almost like I'm two different people in that way. And then there's various other things I've done quietly, and And I'm working on another book that's coming out soon that's completely different from anything.
Music?
Not even close.
Right.
No.
Right.
No. So you know, but writing, and you know, very happy writing.
What's your main gig these days?
Magazine-wise, I'm writing for The Atlantic and Vanity Fair and GQ.
And then Russell, the same, like, sum it all up in 2 minutes flat, you know?
I mean, I had 15 years in the music business, and it afforded me just an amazing life, just incredible stories and incredible friends from that. And, you know, I mean, I got to travel the world and experience everything. I mean, absolutely everything. I mean, I became friends with people like, you know, George Michael in the end of the day. And, you know, I mean, it's just like I mean, he's a clever man. He was amazing, you know. And, you know, those sort of people like Morrissey and George, they're special people. They're really special people. And so it was nice to be around them. And George opened so many doors for me. He opened the music directing career. The second music video I directed, we co-directed. So that opened the doors. After 15 years of starting with you, I sort of fell out of love with the music industry. I didn't like the music. I didn't like I directed 100 music videos in the end of the day, and I didn't like the music coming to me. I didn't like the artists coming to me. So I decided to go back to what the 3-4-year-old kid used to do, which was draw and paint. And I've had a 20-year career as an artist, which has beyond anything I could even imagine, you know.
It's phenomenal. But here's a final question. Why did the three of us end up in America? Why did we end up living here?
It rained every day of June 91 in England. And I'm like, this is the summer, this is whatever. No, I always wanted to live in California. I always saw this as the new Rome in the 80s when we were doing all this. I always aspired to everything American and surfing and the great lifestyle. And, you know, I came because there'd be different faces to photograph, you know. The same faces were coming to the camera time and time again, you know, so...
Right. So you had that vision from a young age, like, I can see where I'm going to be. It's
Yeah,
going to be California.
yeah, absolutely.
How are you, Chris?
It's a mixture of personal and professional, you know, personally for love, but professionally, I feel awkward saying the truth, which is that because I love the British kind of writing culture that I grew up in, but magazine writing particularly is taken so much more seriously here, and so you're able to do it in so much more of a serious way and to do it as a serious kind of adult life. And that doesn't mean the end result is sort of boring or po-faced or something. I'd be incredibly upset if that was what I'd been doing. But it's just simply, it's not, you know, it sometimes feels in Britain like it's, you know, a hobby that you need to grow out of.
Wow, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You know, and there's some fantastic writers in Britain. So I'm not, you know, but it's really hard to make a living doing it in Britain. And here, I had a great life doing it and been able to have amazing experiences and had the resources to, you know, travel all around the world and do incredible things and write about and have the time to write about the things I want to write about. So that's really been the professional reason.
Huh?
Tony.
There was a bank holiday that I was at Notting Hill Carnival. It might have been after the jamming folded. It might have been 86. It was probably Notting Hill Carnival, bank holiday Monday 86, where it rained all day long. And I was just, I don't think I can take any more of this.
Right.
And
rain in the summertime.
And similarly, I have to also say, we can circle all the way back to UB40, and maybe this is where we should end it. They had a single called "If It Happens Again," which was actually written about the idea of if Thatcher gets elected a third time.
Right.
It's like, if it happens again, I won't say I'm sorry, I'll pack my bags and go.
Right.
And I took that very seriously. And I was like, you know what? I don't need to stay in a country that, you know, like I'm fed up with being the minority right now. I know I'll be the minority in the States. Everybody was like, Thatcher, you're going from Thatcher to Reagan. I'm like, yeah, but New York City just doesn't feel that way.
No.
It just feels more alive. And I never regretted that part of it. And funny enough, I also thought I would end up in the countryside somewhere and skip the suburbs, and I did. And
right.
That made sense. But it's funny, it was the UB40 song. I was never even that big a fan of them. It stuck with me.
But you always had Ipswich.
Yes.
We always had Ipswich.
Where we fell in love, wasn't it? Even though I don't remember going to Ipswich.
We will always have Ipswich. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you to Chris and Russell again for the conversation, and thank you to Russell for hosting us in New York City that evening. Chris honed in on something that I think is at the essence of our work as journalists and photographers, and is also at the essence of a good podcast, which is to be interested in our subjects. I believe the three of us were genuinely interested in the journeys we've all taken, both from our beginnings to where we've ended up, the time we spent at jamming, and I believe that came across in the conversation you just heard. So, as mentioned up front, the book is now out. It's called The Best of Jamming, Selections and Stories from the Fanzine that grew up 1977 to 86. It's out worldwide at this point. And if you didn't gather already from everything that you've heard or haven't seen it yet, it's a compendium of some of the best and most varied articles from all across the decade-long run of jamming. It includes pieces on politics, sports stars like George Best, as you will have heard, all manner of different musics. It's got contributions from people like Chris and Russell, and lots of other people who were part of the magazine's journey. Billy Bragg wrote the foreword, and I wrote something to accompany every issue, so it's also a history of jamming, and it feels like, and was designed to be like, one of those Christmas bumper annual editions of something like Beano or Shoot that as kids we would sometimes get, would certainly hope to get in our holiday stockings. So yeah, I'm giving you gift ideas. As also mentioned up front, we have some events coming up, some in-person events at which I'll be appearing with some excellent, really well-informed hosts. We'll have some movies at some DJs at others. Those are all going to be listed in the show notes, which you can see on your phone or your computer. And otherwise, just follow the web links that you hear in the credits and the social media that you can find in the show notes. And you'll get all the information there. All of these events are, of course, COVID permitting. I'm going to let my great friend Jenny DeHart give you those credits. She was one of the guests on episode 1 from Classroom to Clubs. Yes, what a long journey we've taken, and how great it is to still be friends with people all these years down the line. Take care. See you at the next episode. Cheers. Bye.
This episode of the Jamming Fanzine podcast was produced by Tony Fletcher. Greg Morton provided editing assistance and designed the logo. The Jamming Fanzine podcast theme was written, recorded and produced by Noel Fletcher. The book The Best of Jamming, Selections and Stories from the Fanzine that Grew Up 1977 to 86 is published by Omnibus Press. For more information, please visit tonyfletcher.net or omnibuspress.com. Check the show notes for more details, and if you like what you hear, please hit subscribe, leave a review, a rating or share. We'll be back on the podcast stands in 2 weeks, bringing back that